Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar presented by Callagy Law. Hopefully, everyone is online and we are ready to go with how to successfully resolve your Bergen County divorce. So welcome, everyone, and thanks for attending.
Hi, this is Sean Callagy, and I'm the President and Managing Partner of Callagy Law. We greatly appreciate everybody being on the line today, and we're looking forward to a wonderful about hour and 15 minutes together. And we're ready to get started, and hopefully everybody's on. I know a lot of times you tune into a webinar and things won't start on time, but we're ready to get going right about now. So Chris and Brian, we got Brian McCann, Chris Cavalli, and I'm Sean Callagy, and we'll talk a little bit more about who we are in a moment. But go ahead, Chris.
So Sean, a lot of people are wondering why we are doing this.
Sure. So I think, and listen, we'd be lying right off the bat if we didn't say that we would love to develop more business-to-business relationships, right? So we're huge fans of integrity and truth in the process. But in addition, the only way you build relationships is by giving people massive and real value. So if all we're trying to do today is get people on a telephone line to tell them a little bit about ourselves and promote our services, then you would appropriately be very upset about what we've promoted here. Our goal and our outcome, though, is to give you very real content to help you in the matrimonial process on an emotional level and in a practical process, understanding it and getting through it. And we want to give real value so people feel fantastically about who we are and what we're up to, and quite frankly, so you're helped out there.
So Sean, tell us why people should tune in for the next hour and 15 minutes and what they're going to get, in return for tuning in and attending the webinar.
Listen, Chris, and everybody out there, your time is incredibly valuable. So once again, we're not going to sit here and just talk about ourselves and what we're up to. We're going to get down and give people very tangible takeaway information. And that's why in a moment, if we haven't seen it yet, we're going to have a slide that has a pen and paper on it, because we're going to ask you to please take out a pen and paper and take notes while you're on this line today. And I would honestly challenge you, if you can send us an email on this if you like, if this isn't true. I'm going to put a challenge out right from moment one. If this sounds like any other webinar you've ever heard in family law and sounds simply self-promotional and is bankrupt of any true value for you, please send us an email and tell us that we deceived you by getting you on this and wasted your time. I would like to hear from it. However, I'm also going to ask that if it's quite different than that and you feel there is the real value that I'm promising you and Chris is promising you, Brian is promising you, then please let us also know about that. We'd be greatly appreciative. We're going to do a public service for the community. Obviously, we're also looking to help ourselves in this process, but only through giving real and massive value. So I truly think that you're in for a very interesting ride if you're facing any challenge, contemplating divorce, having struggles at home. These are massively stressful and challenging issues for people in their life. It affects adults, it affects children, it affects people generationally. There's enormous financial consequences, psychological consequences involved in the decisions that you make and how you go through this process. So we're here to help with very real points in all these areas for today. So again, thank you for being on the line.
All right, before we get into content, we just want to let everyone know exactly who we are, where we are, and a little brief background of the law firm. So Sean, if you could just tell us quickly about yourself.
Sure. My name is Sean Callagy. I'm the managing partner of Callagy Law and president. I've been an attorney for 20 years. I started my own law firm 18 years ago after working for a large law firm and substantially disagreeing with a lot of the things that I saw out there. This is not a promotional moment, so I'll simply tell you that we believe fundamentally as our mission for Callagy Law to change how people feel about lawyers one client at a time for a caring, urgency, and our aggression. And this is part of our public outreach, and I'd like to let Chris and Brian talk a bit about themselves. Chris Cavalli and Brian McCann are partners in the firm. They are also certified matrimonial attorneys, which puts them in a very small subset of attorneys in the state of New Jersey. So Chris, you want to say hello, and Brian?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Sean. I also have been practicing for 20 years. Sean and I were born one day apart, actually, so we've been practicing for the same amount of time. I have exclusively practiced family law for my entire career. I was a judicial law clerk in Bergen County in 1995, 1996, in the Chancery Division family part, where we practice exclusively. And just prior to joining, Brian and I joining Callagy Law as partners, Brian and I had our own law firm, which was also exclusively devoted to matrimonial law, Callagy and McCann in Glen Rock, and we had that practice for about 7 years. Brian?
Thanks, Chris. So Brian McCann, I'm also a certified matrimonial law attorney, as is Chris. I've been practicing exclusively in family law for 15 years, so I'm the youngest of the three of us. And as Chris was saying, we did have a prior law firm that was exclusively devoted to family law as well. I was also a judicial law clerk in Bergen County in the family law part, which involved every aspect of family law. And we're very glad to be partners with Sean now and be able to start the family law department in Callagy Law.
Chris and Brian, thanks very much. And I'll add one more piece of this. So, and this is not, again, why you should think we're wonderful. It's why you should think there's value to be listened to. We have 55 years of experience in the telephone line, and that doesn't necessarily mean a lot. But there's been a ton of successful resolution of family law cases with Brian, Chris, and myself. Prior to Chris and Brian joining, I have worked in the area of family law. I did at some point run a general practice. Now we are a very subdivided practice with 80 plus people working for the firm. I was also fortunate enough, and this is where I can share with you some of the perspectives that people have, including judges and navigating the system. I have two $27 million plus jury verdicts in the past 2 years, putting me in the top 100 jury verdicts for the year in those years. And I'm a certified life and business coach. So the emotional dynamics of litigation, including family law, divorce, child custody, and life, quite frankly, are of interests that drive how I look at the world. So there's going to be some things we're about to talk about on this phone call that can help you emotionally and practically, as we talked about. So you're having this from every angle: the years of experience, the practical success and results, and the training and background on the emotional side as well.
So let's start with our topics. We are going to cover 3 main topics today and certainly break those down into subtopics and give you some insight on those. But the 3 main topics we're going to discuss are demystifying the family court system, the secret to protecting your rights, your family, and yourself, and the step-by-step process of divorce litigation beginning to end.
So, Sean, why don't you help our listeners explain what we mean by demystifying the family court system?
Sure. I think one of the most significant things that I see with all clients that come into the firm, and certainly with family law clients in particular, because it is literally the most emotionally charged dynamic that people deal with in their life. It's one thing to lose your business, which is awful and horrible. It's something that I deal with frequently. But when you're talking about your family being in jeopardy, your marriage, I mean, it's so emotionally charged. So one of the things that people have is this wild sort of lack of understanding of what really goes on within the court system. And we're going to look at today in that area some of the things that people simply don't understand. For example, sometimes I hear people say that they want to punish their spouse. And sometimes you hear that people want to gain revenge. Sometimes you hear that people want to have their significant other held accountable in this process somehow. So there's an emotional dynamic that's attached to it. And then people will have incredible questions just about timeframes and how all this works. So as we try to demystify it, really we're talking about educating about what it is, what it isn't, and how all this works. And that's what we're really looking to do, Divine.
So what is the family court here to do? That's a great question, because just as Sean said, we're going to talk about what they're not here to do. The family court is primarily concerned with getting your case resolved. Of course, they want everything to be resolved fairly. They're not really interested in having a ton of trials. They're here to promote settlement. They're here to move your case along. And if that includes appointing experts to get the case ready for settlement, hopefully, but they will try the case. The family courts will try every case if need be, but they do everything they can not to, because trials are costly, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. Sean, what do you have to add about what the family court is here to do?
Okay. Well, I would share, family court is here to get these cases resolved, but the primary motivating factor, right, Chris and Brian, and you were there, is to clear the docket. And the first fundamental misunderstanding that I see that people have about the family court system, which is very painful and difficult for people, right? And this is not what I'm saying they don't understand. It's not criticism. It's what you would hope for. Like for me, and for anyone, if you're in a situation where you've been wronged by your spouse, let's say that there was, something that happened that was very hurtful. There's, financial imbalance. There's things that went wrong in the process. There's this desire that you're going to have some level of emotional validation coming from a judge, right? That's how we picture judges. They're sort of symbolic elements in our culture of fairness. Yes, would you guys agree? Right? So you hope that the judge is going to say, that one was bad, you are good, right? And unfortunately, that is not possible. It's not what the system is here or designed to do. Okay? So what the system isn't here designed to do, first and foremost, is to clear their calendar, right? They're here to clear the calendar. And when people hear that, it's amazingly, right, upsetting. But wasn't that, when you were a clerk, wasn't there enormous pressure, yes or no, to clear the calendar?
Yes.
Right?
The first thing we learned was how to dispose of the stockpiles of motions that were filed. And if they could be resolved, resolve them. If they could be dismissed, get them dismissed. And then last but not least, if we have to, if the judge has to decide them, they'll decide them. But exactly, they're here to clear the calendar.
And we will certainly talk about that a little bit more in terms of how long a divorce process is going to take. But what we also wanted to talk about is what the family court is not here to do. And what Sean was explaining a little bit earlier was a fundamental misunderstanding of the entire family court process and what the judge is there to do. The judges are not there to deal with personal animosity between spouses, and they're not deal with the courthouses are not built to deal with those emotional aspects of the divorce case. And Sean was speaking a little bit more about that earlier, but it's not going to be about revenge or marital fault to a judge.
And again, and so many times, right, we have clients that are looking for that empathy, right? You've been through a painful process. You're walking into a room and you're like, wait a minute, like it's just okay that my spouse cheated on me, took money in our bank account, went with their significant other off somewhere, and the answer is it's not okay societally, right? But within the courtroom, the judge is really not that concerned at all, quite frankly. That is not the issue that the judge is trying to resolve. They're trying to resolve the issues that we'll talk about that come up, but they're not resolving these issues there. And so fundamentally, one of the big challenges for clients, and we'll talk about that at some level today, when we get to a unique thing that we've created, is how then you deal with those emotions. Because you also don't want to walk into your lawyers and go, wow, so you're just a bunch of cold people, you're telling me to like stick my emotions somewhere else? Absolutely not. But we're going to prepare you to understand you're not going to get what you're seeking within the courtroom, but you do need to get it from somewhere because people do need emotional healing.
Right. And emotions are a big part of divorces, and we're not here to tell anyone to just set their emotions aside. And we are here to right wrongs. We are here to fight for our clients. So in Sean's illustration, if someone drains a bank account, we're not just saying don't worry about it, don't be emotional about it. We will fight for that. We will right that wrong. We are here to present facts to judges. Facts are okay. Judges will deal with facts. What they don't want to hear is the bickering back and forth, the little minutia. There's a fine line between putting real solid facts before the court and proving a point and just kind of whining to the court. And that's what we're here to decipher.
But here's a critical distinction for everybody to understand, right, Chris and Brian? The skill set is being able to have discernment. And discernment for what the court wants to hear and what it doesn't want to hear. And then slowly, if somebody is a dishonest person, the value is you can over time in the process impact their credibility with the court, but you can't do it from day one, right? It takes time, it takes skill, it takes understanding how to get the court to truly see what you're trying to have the court see. We've all had experiences where sometimes that can take 6 months. It can take a bunch of motions, but it's trusting your counsel and trusting the process that we're going to get there. But if you try to push it down a judge's throat on the wrong day, at the wrong time, in the wrong moment, you're not going to get where you want to get to. So it's a critically important piece.
Sean, in your opinion, who are our family court judges?
Right, great question, right? Great segue. Our family court judges are people. right? They're people that were lawyers. So they're people that have their own families. They've gone through, some of them, their own divorces. Some have gone through multiple divorces. Some of them are wonderful and have, amazingly open, emotional experiences and a lot of empathy. Some have very little empathy. They represent the population as a whole. There's not a selection criteria that says that these people are the smartest. There's not a selection criteria that says these people are the most effective at judging conflict. There's no criteria that says these are the most empathetic. It's a cross-section of our population. They are, however, entitled to respect and deference because that's part of the law. That's part of the ethical codes. But it doesn't mean, however, that if a judge is off and making mistakes, that your counsel, or certainly not us, are going to allow that path to continue unchallenged. It's an interesting, again, finessing dynamic and balancing between how you advocate effectively and persuasively versus turning it into a war between you and the judge, because that's what you also don't want to have, where you're affecting this person emotionally, because who are our judges? They're people like us, right? So if all you do is go in and complain continuously, and you become somebody that's something that's creating a major time drain that they perceive to be unnecessarily, then that can end up being a very significant challenge for how the judge perceives your case. So that's why balancing all these interests, because of who these judges are, is important. Yes, you, Clerk.
Yes.
Clerk.
And
What did you say?
I think you said something really important, Judge, is that they are people, and they are all different types of people. So in Bergen County, there's 7 or 8 judges that could be on the family bench at any given time. And Brian and I appear before each and every one of them regularly. And we know their demeanors. We kind of know what they think is important and less important across the board. I think that all of the judges are very, very mindful of custody and parenting time decisions. And first and foremost, they put the children in a divorce at the forefront. But each and every judge, it could be anywhere from a young judge to an old judge, a male or a female, they have their tendencies. They have their strong points and their weak points. And I think it's important to know what judge you're going to be in front of and have an attorney who has appeared before that judge and can counsel you in your case in the right direction for each and every circumstance.
I absolutely agree with both what Sean and Chris had to say. So let's move on to topic number 2, which is the secret to protecting your rights, your family, and yourself.
Sounds like a pretty intense topic, my friend.
Absolutely.
So I think in this area, so first, just to really drive that point home one more time, understanding you're walking into a human situation as we demystify the courtroom. You shouldn't be intimidated. You shouldn't be afraid. You should be respectful, appropriately deferential, and your lawyers, whether it be us or someone else, should be putting you at ease, and you should be fully prepared to understand what's about to happen, right? Now, once that is in place, then yes, we can turn to topic number 2, and we're going to protect your rights. And there's a lot of rights that are at stake. Your family's at stake, your rights individually at stake. And so all of those dynamics come up at play, right, Chris Bryan, in this situation.
So within topic number 2, the secret to protecting your rights, your family, and yourself, Sean, what do we mean by the psychology of the process?
Okay, so we've kind of begun to talk about it a little bit, right? The things that I've seen, I am a child of divorce, right? My parents divorced, I was very young. I've gone through a divorce myself. I happen to have, I would say, with a great degree of pride, an excellent relationship with my ex-wife, and we co-parent very, very well together. And in fact, we're able to resolve it without the use of lawyers, believe it or not, in a very complex situation, me as an attorney. Very few people would think that. So, and I would attribute that to having the appropriate focus psychologically and emotionally. And everything that we do in life, and certainly in the divorce process, is about asking ourselves one simple question. What is our outcome? And for most people in our culture, we lose sight of the fact that we're emotionally driven and not logically driven. And that's just a reality in life. So if we're going through this divorce process unaware, and we're just sort of living life as it goes, we have a dear friend that we've helped, that's in a different state, but a dear friend of mine, Chris and Brian are familiar with this, is going through a divorce. And he and his wife are having wonderful communication, and this is all about the psychology of divorce, right? They've been having wonderful communication. They've agreed that it's simply not going to work. It's a very unfortunate situation, and they go to 2 attorneys. And all we've been advocating to both of them, and both the man and the woman are very dear friends, and I'm very hurt and upset about the situation for them and their children. But I've been advocating to both of them that they need to, in this situation, very simply, keep the focus on the outcomes, right? Being fair to one another, but putting children first, and these are the right outcomes. So they go to their respective attorneys, and guess what happens? Immediately, the attorney for one of them, right, fires off a highly aggressive, super nasty letter with a ton of content in it. And then the spouse that received it, I'm not going to go man and woman, the receiving spouse calls up the sending spouse, or about the lawyer, and starts flipping out. How could you do this? And all of a sudden, everybody's emotionally engaged. And the sending spouse saying, I didn't know my lawyer was going to send that. And the other one's like, you're a liar. And all of a sudden, everybody's off track. And immediately, from one letter being sent out, which, by the way, to me, was a terrible job by the one attorney. Terrible job, because that attorney was investing themselves in the process in a way that they weren't leading their clients down the right track. But psychologically, right, in this situation, these 2 people got off the outcome immediately. The kids weren't first anymore. Ego became first. So the psychology of the process is really all about staying on point. What is the outcome?
No doubt, exactly right. Our job is to resolve issues, not create conflict. Unfortunately, there are attorneys out there that will do exactly what Sean just said. They'll create issues, they'll create conflict, they'll tell their client to fight for issues that frankly they might, that are otherwise resolvable, or not even something that the person thought was something that was an issue. And the job, our role is to make people look at their lives and the best interests of their lives and their children, not their personal vendettas and revenge.
Absolutely, and I'll just add this very, very quickly. Sometimes as we talk about these things, right, people can sit back and become very uncomfortable and concerned that it sounds like you guys are kind of nice people. We've talked about empathy, we've talked about reasonableness and all those things, and we'll discuss this certainly at the end. But I can promise you that our firm and our approach, when appropriate and necessary to protect you, is at an incredibly highly aggressive level. And we didn't produce 2 $27 million plus jury verdicts from this firm because we're passive, right? But the idea is to be reasonable first, and then, if we have to be unbelievably aggressive. So let's keep going.
So part of that psychology, the process, what Sean was talking about also in his example, gave a great example of regulating your emotions, which is key in the divorce process because emotions play such a great role in it in terms of how you engage your lawyer and how your lawyer engages the other side. And all ranges of emotions will come out in the divorce process that will affect your ability to either resolve it or move forward. Wouldn't you agree, Sean? Things like guilt and anger and revenge tend to drive a litigant, and the attorney's job is to regulate those emotions.
Absolutely, and it is absolutely the attorney's job to regulate them. And also, hopefully, it's going to be something we can give you a takeaway today that is going to help you almost in a toolkit fashion today to walk away with something to help you regulate the emotions on their own. I'm, as we talked about before, I am a life coach, business coach, and I've had a tremendous amount of work that I've done with a lot of people, and I've used these tools myself. I've learned them other places that can help us move forward to produce the kinds of things that we want. We don't want anger. Who wants to wake up angry? Who wants to wake up in guilt? And a lot of times people feel disempowered, and they feel without choice to get themselves through these emotions. They're natural, and I validate anyone going through the divorce process for feeling guilt, anger, frustration, desire for revenge. These are natural human emotions that can't just be suppressed by saying, oh, you shouldn't be that way. There's ways that we have to work through them because everyone is going to feel those things in a divorce process at some point in time, without a question.
Sean, as you said, you're a certified business and life coach, and I think you have come up with something we may want to patent, kind of half-jokingly, called the Wheel of Divorce. So,
Comment, and then you can go through the wheel.
absolutely.
So the idea with the wheel is in any area of our life we want to produce certain levels of results. And please do this, like if you're going through a divorce for sure, or you create this wheel for anything that you do. This helps you identify the areas that you have to focus on and think about. And you can't manage anything in your life, whether it's your divorce, your business, your health, your relationship with your kids, whatever it is, if you can't measure it and monitor it. Key takeaway, if you take away nothing else from today, that tool is so incredibly valuable because it gives you the ability to say, I'm here, I'm measuring it, I'm monitoring it, I'm evaluating this regularly, and now I'm here, I'm moving forward, or I'm going backwards. So this is the idea of the wheel that applies to the wheel of life, and we've come up with our own wheel of divorce, as you said, Chris.
Right, and in any given case or circumstances, any one of these categories can change. But this is what what we think is a typical issues in the wheel of divorce. We have, starting from the upper right, we have finances, your relationship with your own attorney, your own mental well-being, your relationship with your soon-to-be ex-spouse, the emotional well-being of your children, your own happiness, your relationship to the divorce process, and the happiness of your children. So, Sean, just if you can, explain what this wheel is, and then we're going to have two illustrations.
Sure. All right. So let's walk through it together, Chris.
Okay.
Like for a second, pretend that you're somebody going through this process yourself, right? So pick one of the categories, any one of the categories, and you folks, listening, please do the same. So go ahead, pick a category.
My own mental well-being.
Great. So your own mental well-being. Again, this is hypothetical, assuming you're going through a divorce process with a high degree of stress, right? So you pick your own mental well-being, and what I want you to do is I want you to draw a line, depending upon where you think your mental well-being is right now. The outer perimeter of the circle, the end of this is like a pizza slice, right? So the outer perimeter at the edge, the crust, that would be a 10. You'd be like, my mental well-being is perfect. It couldn't be better. It's exactly where I want it to be. And so you color in so that outer perimeter of the crust. If it was kind of right in the middle, 5, like it's okay. I mean, it certainly could be worse, but it could be a whole heck of a lot better. You would draw a line right in the middle of that pizza slice called mental well-being. Or you would, if it was horrendous, terrible, you're like ready, honestly, to need to go to a hospital because you feel such a sense of overwhelm, dread, depression, any of those things, right? You would draw a very teeny little line right like at the center, like almost, just this tiny little line. So you have the smallest bit of the pizza slice, right? So go ahead, draw that line. And again, this is for hypothetical purposes. So,
hypothetically, let's say I am at a 6 on my own mental well-being.
Great. Okay. And again, please, folks, have that pen and paper out. This is a slide. Draw this little circle yourself and draw that little line, right? So you're at a 6. The question that I would then ask you is, what are 3 things that you could do that would take, actually, I'd first ask you, what would a 10 look like, right? So for you, tell me what a 10 in mental well-being would look like.
Well, on the wheel, it would look like a full slice of pizza.
Right. And just like what would have to be going on for you? You feel confident,
you
happy?
You would wake up happy every day. You would approach every relationship, whether it was personal or business, with your children as like a perfect 10. Everything would be all smiles, and everyone would love you, and you would love everyone back.
Great, and that's yours. And for everybody who's listening, that whatever yours is what yours is, right? It's your 10. So what you're gonna say is, let's say you're at a 6 or 5 or 2 or 8, Chris is at a 6. You're gonna sit back and go, what needs to happen? What are the 3 key things that would have to happen to take me from a 6 to a 10? And identify those 3, right? And you're gonna write them down, and I'm suggesting a journal. Go buy yourself a hardbound journal, or you can go keep this on your phone, and you can begin to track your progress, right? And you can make it attorney-client privilege, right? So you write that attorney-client privilege, to share with my attorney, so there's no discovery issues that people couldn't get into it. And you're gonna write things down to make yourself feel better. So for example, one might be, hey, I feel much better from working out. So one might be, I've completely stopped working out because I feel so depressed, I feel so stressed out, I feel like I have no time, but I'm gonna commit to working out 4 days a week for 30 minutes a day. That might be number 1, right? Number 2 would be, I'm gonna make sure I listen to at least one video that I find on YouTube, free video, from Joel Osteen, or from Tony Robbins, or from Joyce Myers, or from whatever, right? I'm going to listen to something really positive that makes me feel really good. And third, I've stopped listening to music. I'm going to make sure that I listen to music regularly that I love to listen to. Hey, I'm personally, and I know you like them as well. We've been at the same concert. I'm going to listen to Bruce Springsteen, regularly to make myself feel better. And having those three things down, but then reviewing it each day. And then deciding and keeping score and saying, yes, I did these things. And you know what? I'm not like a 7 now. I do feel a little bit better today. And some days I don't feel like liking it. Some days I pull back a little bit. But over the course of a day, a week, a month, 6 months, you're measuring and monitoring these things to expand your slice of pizza regularly. And a quick illustration again. Let's say that there's another slice called relationship with your children, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So you might say, my kids are a mess. They're upset. They're stressed. We've done a really good job keeping things away from them, or they've been hearing things. So what are 3 key things? Maybe one would be we're going to sit down and give them an honest conversation about where things are regularly. Second, I'm going to budget time in and just do something with them that completely they want to do. I'm going to be totally present, right? And define these to-dos, these outcomes, they're not to-dos, these outcomes in a really favorable way. So instead of saying, set an appointment to have with my kids, I would say, create a safe time to have with my children where I'm totally present, we're fully connected, and make a magical memory, right? That might be a little bit different than just make a time to have with my kids. So the suggestion is, as you're going through this divorce process, and there's all these different things, managing a relationship with your attorney, each of these different 8 items individually are critically important. And the whole idea is that the more you're moving towards a level 10 in these categories, the happier and more effective things will be, versus our next slide, right?
Absolutely, which this slide shows an unbalanced wheel. And when each person fill out the wheel of divorce, and with each category being rated differently, you have an unbalanced wheel. And Sean, what do you think when the person has an unbalanced wheel that will do to them individually?
Sure. Well, I'm certain that we have both on the line today, counselors and potential folks that are going through the divorce process. And I'm sure the counselors will talk about life balance. And this is giving you a literal picture of the divorce process balance, right? And what's happening for you. So if you have you're happy, everything is wonderful in certain ways, relationship with your children is great, but let's say that one category that's dented way in is the relationship with your attorney. You don't like them, you're stressed out, you're not in great communication, you have no idea what's going on. Well, that's going to create an inherent challenge for you maintaining your more optimal way of functioning and being less stressed, right? So the idea of looking at that wheel, coloring in the outsides of it, is to give you a very real perspective, right? And counselors, please feel free to, if you haven't heard this before, we literally created it. Maybe you've seen something like it before. I have never, maybe you have, but use this. And we would be very happy to have you do that with your clients as they're going through a divorce process to know and understand what they're up to. It's a simple tool for sure, but amazingly powerful. And so it's not enough just to know of information. I learned something a long time ago, guys, right? And maybe you've heard this before, you probably heard me say it, that I don't believe we know anything that we're not using. So somebody might go, okay, yeah, I get it. I understand that if you're not using this, you don't get it, right? Because the value is enormous. So we don't know anything unless we're actually using it. So knowledge is really an active process. So what we're imploring you to do as one of our key takeaways from today is to please use this wheel of divorce and use this as a tool in your life. Because if you sit in this process and it's this imbalanced, you're going to have an enormous amount of stress. You're not going to get the optimal outcomes from the divorce process, and you're not going to be experiencing life in the way that you would like to be while you're going through the divorce process. Right? Correct?
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. And maybe you can help me explain. If one of my areas was a 2, another was a 7, another was a 4, should I focus on all the areas that I'm deficient in at once, or should I try and focus on one thing at a time? If I have an unbalanced wheel like this, really, should I focus on the one that I feel most strongly about and let the other ones just be where they are, or should I try and do this all at once?
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion would be to be monitoring them all at once, to be doing that complete exercise. So literally sit down, look at all of them, right? And then to take those 3 outcomes in each area that are the most efficient, quick outcomes that you can create to move the needle, but then to work on moving the needle in the ones that you're having the greatest degree of stress coming from. So for example, let's say that things are going pretty well with your children, it's an 8. So you may not have to have a huge endeavor, right, to change people. You'd love to have 10, but that might not be the top priority right now to go from 8 to a 10 with your children, because your children are doing well. You might want to make sure you're maintaining what you're doing. So you want to keep measuring it and maybe have one key outcome you're focused on, like keeping a date with them once a week to do something really meaningful where you're fully focused and attentive for that period of time, just with you and them, as opposed to going to a game with them or a movie or something, but you're really connected. But let's say that conversely, your own mental health and well-being is a 4. Well, I would be attacking that pretty significantly. And then you look and go, oh my God, my relationship with my attorney, like I feel afraid to talk to them. I feel like they're, the person who answers the phone is difficult. I feel like I feel like they're condescending towards me. So I would say, yes, focus on all the areas, but then prioritize the key ones that are going to take the most stress away. And critically, to make sure that you're putting in positive energy during the process. So if it's all about the divorce process and you lose your life, in that process, that's going to lead to a lot of stress and pain as well.
And certainly wouldn't you agree that it's important that you speak with your attorney and show your attorney this wheel of divorce, so at some point, if it's the beginning of the divorce is unbalanced, you and your attorney can help you get to a balanced wheel.
Why do we want a balanced wheel, Sean? It looks much nicer on the slide, that's for sure. It looks like something we could drive on, but why do we want a balanced wheel?
Well, you said drive on it, right? Like if we're looking at the first wheel and that's our life and we're trying to drive on it, we're not going to go too far, right? So everybody agrees, and this is like a cliche phrase at this point, that we want a life of balance. This is literally how you get a life of better balance, by identifying what are the key areas that are important, and going forward in the divorce process, these areas are going to be there, whether you're selecting them or not. Like these areas that we've outlined are there for you. Obviously, you have children, that then that area is not there. But these are the basic areas you're going to be confronting. So the whole idea is to expand these areas so you have a much smoother process as you're driving down that road to get to the outcomes that you want out of your life.
Great. I think we are now on to topic number 3, which is the step-by-step process of the divorce litigation from start to finish.
You know what, if I could just add real quick to just emphasize. So we talked about demystifying, right? So in the demystification process, now this is where we're going to get into a lot more detail, right? So this is kind of set up for what the divorce process is really about. So this is going to also relate to the beginning of demystifying the divorce process. And we talked about the psychology of this process. And if I could, leave everybody, please, Chris or Brian, if you disagree, share that the place that I would suggest that people come from when they're getting divorced is, I want to get through this process as efficiently and effectively as I can, with my children as intact as they can possibly be, while making sure I'm appropriately protecting my rights, right? So if it comes down to you're losing your mind and you're fighting over $1,000, it's probably not something to lose your mind over. It's certainly not something to pay attorneys $5,000 and fight over $1,000. So focus on the bigger picture outcome. The details do matter. And if you're dealing with somebody who's completely unreasonable, trust your counsel as long as they earn your trust. You must measure and monitor the work of your attorneys in communicating with you, helping understand where we're going. The strategy of the case are critical, critical, critical. And if you walk in, by the way, to your attorney with the wheel of divorce, and they're like, what is this? I don't even care about this. And they have that degree of lack of empathy, depth, and insight, then I would suggest to you that you're in the wrong place. So let's turn to section 3.
So one of the questions that I think I have been asked by my clients in every single case at some point is, how long will this take? So that's a great question, and I try to give everyone a great answer. And usually the answer is, it depends. So a divorce can take literally a few weeks or a couple of months if everyone is on the same page and everyone addresses the issues that need to be resolved and resolve them. A lot of people actually come into my office from lower income clients to really, really high net worth clients, and they say, my husband or wife and I have made a deal. So what you want to do then is you want to make sure the deal is fair. You want to make sure all the finances are in order, all the documents back up what everyone says, make sure that everything is worth what everyone says it's worth, and you can draw up an agreement and get a case done quickly. Conversely, you can have a dispute on every single issue, from custody and parenting time to finances to equitable distribution of assets, and your case can take well over a year. The courts try to get everything done from filing of divorce until judgment of divorce done in a year, but it doesn't always happen that way. So how long will my divorce take is a often asked question, and it's a tough one to answer.
And so how long our divorce takes really gets into the possible issues that are in your divorce. And those issues can range from custody and parenting time issues, alimony and child support, equitable distribution of assets and debts, and restraining orders are the most common issues that you will encounter in your divorce process. So when we move to custody and parenting time issues, I think it's important for everyone that has a custody and parenting time issue to know one important thing that I read the other day, that 50% of children of divorce never want to get married, and two-thirds of those children never want to get divorced. And so that leads us to the custody and parenting time issues, because that statistic is a direct result of the parents involving their children in divorce and the parental behavior during divorce. So again, this goes back to a lot of things we were talking about, emotions, and allowing your emotions to govern how you act in the divorce process and how it affects your children. If you do that, the custody and parenting time issues are going to be extreme and are going to lead to a lot of litigation. If you can regulate your emotions and put your children first, then it's not going to be such a drain on the process.
Like we said earlier, the role of the courts primarily is to get cases done. Now, the courts are very sensitive. I think every single family court judge that I know is very sensitive to custody and parenting time issues. It is their priority. But again, they want everyone to settle these cases. So if you come into court and you have a good framework or an agreement as to the custody and parenting time of your children, fantastic. Biggest, most important issue we could check as settled or can easily be settled. If we come into court and that's not settled, the first thing the court's going to do is refer you to custody parenting time mediation. It's an excellent service. It's done in court and it's free. And the mediators in court will help you resolve custody and parenting time issues. Many cases get settled in custody parenting time mediation. However, there are cases that just can't, whether one person is saying the other parent is not fit to have custody, or they just simply can't agree on a day-to-day basis who should have residential custody, who should have how much parenting time. At that point, the courts will either appoint or the attorneys will agree upon, or each party can select their own experts. And custody experts are expensive, they are time-consuming and emotionally draining, and everyone involved will be interviewed in the various reports. Both parents, the children will be interviewed, all kinds of collateral contacts will be interviewed, down to teachers of the children, relatives, friends, and if at all avoidable, you always want to avoid a custody battle, because it is probably the nastiest that we see, because then when people are fighting over custody and parenting time, they say whatever they want to say about the other party, and it's usually not good. So it's something that we are prepared to do, we're equipped to do, we do all the time, but we always foster an attitude of resolving this for your children's best interest, because any child who gets interviewed by multiple experts, God forbid they're little kids, 7, 8, 9 years old, they don't want to be put in that position. They don't want to be asked questions by strangers about their home life and their mom and their dad. So you always have to remember who you're fighting for and what your goal is in custody and parenting time issues.
100%. I would simply reiterate, though, right, Chris and Brian, sometimes, unfortunately, just to make sure you're understanding where we're coming from, we're going to give you a little bit more of this at the end, that you're dealing with unreasonable people. You may have married a narcissist, right? You may have married somebody that has no emotional caring in any way, shape, or form about you, your children, no respect for the court system, and they're amazingly charismatic, super persuasive, and you're in a very, very deep hole because you think you're the only person in the world who knows the reality of how bad they are, and their very aggressive narcissistic attorney comes at you like a freight train down the tracks. And they're making everything about you. They're lying. They're half lying. They're 5% lying continuously, which changes the context for events. And they're literally making you insane in this process. I can promise you that there are ways through that. And we are fully prepared and equipped to deal with that But we hope and pray for you that you do not go through a process that looks anything like that. But if you have to, then then it becomes a process of making sure that the children are protected, and you're going to have to go full tilt into exposing the lie, which can be complicated, but certainly achievable. And that drive can come from either from an unreasonable attorney and a reasonable spouse, or both.
Yeah. So the next possible issue that could arise in your divorce, as we discussed earlier, is alimony. And alimony certainly has a number of components to it, not just how much income is earned by both spouses, but concepts of marital lifestyle, being able to fund two households versus one household, and employment concerns, and imputing income to a spouse that is unemployed or underemployed. So those are some of the issues that will be explored in alimony. In terms of when we're talking about marital lifestyle, it is what you would expect it to be. It's how you lived your life as a married couple. It's the vacations that you took, the cars you drive, the house that you lived in, the clothes you wear, an analysis of a monetary number being placed on how you lived.
Right. Are we going to come to, Ryan, at some point? Should we discuss it now, or do you want to wait for a later slide? The point about establishing precedent.
We do have
a slide.
Right, okay, so
keep going. We do have a slide. Sorry. Go ahead. So the marital lifestyle will absolutely be a part of any alimony analysis when it's an issue in a divorce case. So, and a part of that is also being able to fund two households versus one household. That has to be a consideration not only of your lawyer, but the court as well. And how do we make two households work with the same amount of money that we had only making one household work? So there will be information that's exchanged, and it has to be an open-minded discussion as to, I don't want every dollar I'm entitled to, and that's all I want, and I don't care if he can live or she can live on it or not, because I'm entitled to what I want entitled to. So that will also be a part of the considerations in alimony.
Quick question, alimony question for you guys. So what about for the folks out there that are dealing with somebody who is in a closely held or cash business? Because the fear might be, the tax return says one thing. Can you explain a little bit to folks about how it is less easy to get away with those lies than maybe they would at first blush be concerned about? Like, meaning that, that we can get there in terms of figuring out more of the truth.
Absolutely, and just as a general matter, where we give general kind of a one brush over on these issues, but every divorce is different, and things can be very complicated when there's businesses involved, closely held businesses. There's a lot of cash businesses, and we deal with those issues, those complex financial issues, on a daily basis in our practice. And certainly there are ways to tell that. We look at bank accounts. We can hire forensic accountants to look at a business and do business evaluations. We do lifestyle analysis, and we look at credit card statements, and we look at cash receipts, and we can look at a tax return and look at the amount of money that's being brought in and say a tax return, for example, says we make $100,000 a year, but you live in a $2 million house and drive 4 Mercedes and put your kids in private school. How could you possibly do all those things if you're only earning $100,000 a year? So there are easy ways, and we employ them on a daily basis to figure out what the true nature of a lifestyle and income is, rather than what's just represented on a tax return.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Next, we have child support, which obviously is involved in every case where children are involved. So we have the New Jersey Child Support Guidelines, right? And they, the guidelines apply, generally speaking, to families that have a combined, both parents, net after-tax income of $187,200 or less. Over the guidelines, the court has to look at the lifestyle of the children and the expenses of the children, and then allocate a fair amount of child support. Within the guidelines, if you're within the guidelines monetarily, that covers most of the children's expenses. It covers the children's expense share of housing, transportation, clothing, supplies. However, we also know that in Bergen County, child support pursuant to the guidelines is really tough to raise children on. So if you're not above the guidelines, we still then try to look at other things that the parents should be sharing. And sometimes these things may actually be covered by child support, but we make exceptions. If we're representing a mom who has 4 kids and all 4 kids are in travel baseball leagues and have a lot of different activities, we're going to make sure that the children, to the best of every party's abilities, continue in these things, and that we say this is over and above the child support guidelines. Obviously, if you're above that income threshold, then we have to do an actual expense by expense analysis of all of the children's expenses and fashion the right amount of child support. Things like ordinary, baseball camps in town and stuff like that might or might not be considered covered by child support, but it makes sense to be detailed oriented and make sure we focus on what the children's activities are already and look in the future as to what they're going to be, because it's always better to spend some extra time and address these issues now than to just come back and address them later and then dispute it later. Then we also have another very big issue is school, private school, and college, and who pays for it, or should the children go? Again, there's a lot to be said as to where the children have already gone during the marriage, and whether that should be continued, or whether there's just enough money whether there's not enough money to continue to go to these schools, and including college. We know college. I'm starting to look at college for my own daughter already, and I am shocked at the expenses of these colleges. I just visited one 2 weeks ago, and it was $67,800 a year, and that is a shocking amount of money. So who pays for it, and who gets to decide where the child is going, or should the child go to a state school? All very, very important issues that need to be dealt with in your divorce agreement, in your divorce case. Sometimes, if the child's really small, we have to put it off to the future, but we want to define that both parents have an obligation to pay. Some parents will negotiate up front, say if you agree to pay for 100% of college in the future, and maybe we put parameters on that we cap it, then maybe they'll give in something else. But it is a very important issue that comes up in almost every case, because I would say over 90% of our clients' children go to college, and college is not free unless, of course, you get scholarships, which is a great thing. So whatever your kid is good at, I say put the money in the lessons now, because it may pay off later.
All right, Chris, real quick, what's the expectation, Bergen County family, about requirement to pay for college or not? Let's say somebody's in a position saying, listen, I don't want to be obligated for that. We're not taking an ethical position on that. But what if that's the question? What is the obligation? Or somebody says, listen, my spouse is saying they don't want to pay for it, and what are my rights? Like, what's the analysis?
Well, the easiest thing to do in cases where the children are not within a year or two of going to college is to say, and you can't get an agreement on, is to say that the parties have an obligation to discuss college and try to agree on it. But the courts, if the parties can't agree on who's going to pay what for college, the courts will impose an obligation upon both parents. Brian and I were having this discussion just the other day, where it almost seems as children of divorced parents have a greater right to have their parents pay for college than children of an intact family. If my wife and I decide that we're not going to give either of our children any money for college, there's really no recourse this child has. She'll have to, put herself through college. In a divorced family, if one parent comes before the court and says, I'm paying my fair share, make him or her pay her fair share, they're going to do it. Now, if someone's making $30,000, $40,000 and is paying, a lot of expenses and can't pay anything, that obligation contribution may be minimal, or it may be, take out a loan and help pay for the loan. But there is an obligation there. But if someone is making $500,000 and just says, I don't want to pay for my kid's college, odds are the court is going to make that person contribute to college. And can that person be heard and say, okay, I'm not paying for that $67,000 college, but I want my kid to go to a state school? That's a valid valid argument, and the court may consider that, and the court may say, okay, so I'll make you pay for your portion of a state school. But it is really a a case by case, fact by fact analysis of who has the ability, and is the child, is the child going to contribute? I've seen a lot of courts kind of going to, a lot of judges, I should say, going to the thought process of every child should have a little skin in the game, as we say. So where parents are making roughly equal salaries, I've seen a bunch of judges recently say each parent and the child are obligated to contribute 1/3, and that child share can be, if the child gets scholarships or grants, then that's the child's share. Or the child may have to do a work study program, or the child may have to take some loans out.
Right.
So there's a lot of different remedies, but it is a big issue.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Say the next possible issue that can arise in a divorce is an asset and debt distribution, which is called equitable distribution in the state of New Jersey. And just as a general fact, so everybody is aware, that New Jersey is not a 50-50 state. We are not a community property state. It is an equitable distribution state. The assets and debts will be distributed fairly, not equally. A lot of people have a misunderstanding that they're just entitled to half of everything. That is not the law in the state of New Jersey. Now, as a practical matter, if you have a long-term marriage of 20 or more years and most of your assets were acquired in that 20 years, more than likely all of your assets are going to divide it up equally. But I like to use the business owner example as an example to show that how the asset cannot be divided up equally. Say you have one spouse that owns a business, that is in that business, that goes to work in that business every single day, that builds that business, that grows that business, and the other spouse is a stay-at-home parent, taking care of the house, taking care of the children, and not directly contributing in any way to the growth and success of the business, and those two people get divorced, not necessarily the business is going to be valued by an accountant to put a number on it that's subject to equitable distribution. Let's just say it's $500,000. The non-owning spouse may not necessarily get 50% of that business because of the lack of direct contribution to the growth. They will get something recognized in an indirect contribution as being the stay-at-home parent, as being the parent that took care of the household and the children, which allowed the other parent to go run that business. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be equal. And I know a lot of people have a misunderstanding of that when they come into our offices and say, well, I should get half of the business, shouldn't I? Not necessarily. So the distribution of assets is going to be a fair distribution, not necessarily an equal distribution. But for the most part, the things that you acquire during your marriage, and we measure the marriage from the date you were filed, the date you got married, to the date a complaint for divorce is filed. Between those 2 dates, we will look at all of the assets and all of the debts that were acquired by the spouses during the marriage, and then we will value them.
That's a critical point, because I think a lot of people think that, well, once we're kind of separated and we kind of agree we're going our separate ways, that is not the time frame. So people can be in a really, because doesn't this happen frequently?
That's absolutely.
Where people were within the same home for years in this quasi weird space that they're thinking they've made an agreement, and that's not the agreement.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
I had a client come in the other day that had been separated, physically separated for 4 years, and had acquired a significant amount of assets in those 4 years. And I had to tell him, no, all of those assets that you acquired in that 4-year separation period, because you had no agreement, are still subject to equitable distribution. Now, again, it's equitable. That doesn't mean his spouse is going to get 50% of those assets he acquired in that separation. We're going to look at the contribution that the other spouse made to the acquisition.
But it certainly doesn't mean that spouse's lawyer is not going to come running in the court and say, give me half.
So right? It's an important difference. It is an absolute important distinction. The timeline ends at filing a complaint for divorce. Unless you have a written agreement that says otherwise, that is what our measuring stick is going to be for the distribution of assets.
And on top of that written agreement, you actually have to divide those assets. Correct. For it to be a valid cutoff date. So if there are people out there that are separated a long time and just assume that everything they're doing now is outside the pot, as we would say, it would behoove yourself to meet with someone and get some counsel on that, because you don't want to wake up one day and be in for a rude awakening.
Absolutely. So so the very process of equitable distribution is identifying the assets and debts which are subject to distribution, and then allocating that distribution between the two spouses, which there will be a number of factors that go into that allocation, both statutory and case law factors that we are very well acquainted with and employ every single day when we deal with equitable distribution. So the next possible issue in your divorce case that you encounter that Mr. Cavalli will talk about is restraining orders.
Unfortunately, domestic violence does occur in marriages, in relationships. There is a Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, and that protects people who are victims of domestic violence. Domestic violence, it can be in a number of forms. It can be, I call it from the lowest rung of the ladder of harassment, but it's got to be real. Just fighting a little bit with your spouse isn't harassment. But then assault, if you're ever assaulted, of course you're a victim of domestic violence. You're entitled to a restraining order. The restraining order process, if it is real and necessary, the victim of domestic violence can get a restraining order either through the local police or at the court, at the courthouse, the domestic violence unit, and they will, if they can prove, based on their testimony, that an act of domestic violence occurred, they will likely get a temporary restraining order. That will come back before a court, usually within 10 days or 2 weeks, and they'll have a hearing whether that restraining order should be a final restraining order or it should be dismissed if it wasn't true. Now, there's also a way to enter into what we call civil restraints, and that's not under the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, and it is the consequences of violating it are not criminal. However, civil restraints in a lot of areas where people have difficulties communicating, or there's been some inability to agree on a lot of things, and there's been actual fighting, it's a way to keep the peace, and it would basically says where one person would reside, and the other person is prohibited from contact. I know I'm trying to kind of go through this quickly. I just want to, people out there have heard of civil restraints and restraining orders, and they're not really the same because
I've been to make a quick point in that. So one of the big things that I think is a takeaway from today is people are like, well, I'm really feeling like my spouse is not treating me appropriately. And we want to let you know right here on this phone line, whether you're a man or a woman, either one, you do not have to accept abusive and harassing conduct from your spouse. It is not okay if your spouse is calling you names, cursing at you repeatedly, sending you text messages. They don't even have to be threatening.
That is all real harassment.
That's real, actionable harassment. So, I've sat down, Chris and Brian have far more experience in it than I do, but I was not long ago, because it was a business litigation and some issues complicated, and there was a domestic restraining order filed. And I sat there for 5 hours in court that day. And I couldn't believe, because I had been quite personally out of touch, and Chris and Brian are the experts in family law, right? But from a litigator's perspective, I was very out of touch with the level of aggressiveness with which judges handle, some of them, harassment restraining orders. So I literally witnessed this happen. 2-second story to understand both what to be careful of and at the same time how much protection you have, right? Because domestic violence is a serious problem for both men and women, right? And there's definitely, women are subjected to domestic violence at a much higher rate than men, but men are in fact subjected to domestic violence pretty regularly in our country as well, much more in the harassment category, for sure. So I sat there, and this nice woman had a former boyfriend, and they were going through this entire discussion, and she had broken up with him, and he had sent her text messages on a couple of different occasions, maybe a year and a half back, and she had said, please, she's in a new relationship, and said, please don't text me or communicate with me anymore. That's it. We're done. Thank you. No more. And she had said it twice. And the second time she said, you're making me feel uncomfortable. Don't text me anymore. Right? And this guy, 6 months later, sent her a dozen roses that said, I'm really sorry for everything that occurred. I just want you to know, no pressure, no stress. I hope you're having a happy life. I hope all is good. The judge entered a final restraining order for harassment against this guy. Now, people might say, that's incredible, that's crazy. I was there, I witnessed it, I watched it happen. Personally, I felt badly for this man, right? And he did not look dangerous to me. Believe me, I have 2 daughters. I'm incredibly sensitive to issues of domestic violence. I have people in my own family that were victims of domestic violence. So I'm not minimizing the gender dynamics at all, but it was shocking to me that what happened, because it wasn't a creepy send, it wasn't something intrusive, but I guess somehow it made her uncomfortable that he even knew her address, and I guess he had to go look for it online somehow. And the judge said that those are next steps to give her a reasonable fear. This is, harassment, final restraining order. This has an enormous impact on this guy's life. So the point, the takeaway is, if this is happening, don't respond, draw lines in the sand and say, don't communicate with me, don't text me, don't name call, don't say anything but the things we have to talk about. You're making me feel uncomfortable. Document that, and you very easily could be preparing yourself to be protected through a restraining order. Conversely, if somebody tells you, don't communicate with me, except follow the instruction, because you can end up with a restraining order and it's a quasi-criminal issue, and it can have an impact on your license, your life, forever. So it's a major issue that people don't understand. Chris,
right, and that sounded like a borderline restraining order, but they are in the courthouse every day. It's a very fine line between someone, and does that person have a reasonable belief or a reasonable fear of the other person?
In that case, the judge said it because the person looked it up online, that was creepy enough to seem like maybe almost stalking.
And once again, every case has its own facts, and what may be a reasonable fear for one person may not be for another. And really, that's the 2-pronged test: is whether A, did that act of domestic violence occur, and then in your case, Sean, obviously the judge thought that was harassment, and then B, whether or not, because of that act of domestic violence, together with any past history that may come out, is that victim a person who needs a restraining order for his or her safety or to prevent future domestic violence.
And to be clear, that was not my client, my case. That was me observing another case that I was down there on. But listen, my client in that situation, it was completely outrageous, where all of the text messages basically aligned with his spouse being the aggressor in the entire situation. She came in and said there was a physical altercation in which his son shoved him, and she said that he restrained the son. And that ended up with the judge leaning towards the restraining order. We ended up settling the case, but it is an incredibly fine line. Stay out of physical contact, stay out of any name calling, aggression, and if that's happening to you, you have immense rights that can be protected. So don't deal with it, don't accept it, document it. So we're got about 10 minutes to go, so let's keep it moving.
This actually brings us to the next slide, which is the role of precedent and the role that precedent will play in your divorce. And Sean, how do you think precedent is important in divorce?
Sure, I mean, that was probably a less intentional segue than it's going to seem, but perfectly. Precedent means, right, and you guys are the experts, but any situation means what was happening continues to happen. And I'm going to defer to you, Brian and Chris, on the legal implications of precedent. But this issue comes up. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm going to make one quick point about documentation and precedent. Then I'll let you take over. But let's say, hey, you know what? I'm spending money. Things are happening. We're kind of separated. Somebody's moved out of the house. I'm taking care of the kids. This is happening. That's happening. But we're all going to figure it out later. That's the thought, right? We're getting along fairly well. We're going to figure it out later. I'm going to ask that question in a second. Along the way, to protect yourself from precedent, because I'm a litigator, folks, and these gentlemen are litigators as well. And I litigate in a lot of different forms in a lot of different ways, in this country. And people do not understand the power of documentation. Listen, Donald Trump is going to potentially lose the White House, and I'm not getting into whose side I'm on or any of the issues, but because he was taped. Tapes have power. Written words, precedent. Written word has power. He said, she said has a lot less power, right? A lot less power. So right now, Donald Trump is talking about things that happened with Bill Clinton, a lot less power than hearing what Donald Trump said. And I'm not, by the way, taking sides. And I have very strong opinions about this I'm not getting into, right? But I'm simply telling you there's a big difference between an audio tape, a videotape, a written text message, a written email. I just won a $27 million jury verdict based on text messages and emails, which contradicted the testimony of people. And we won because we were right and that was the truth. The written word is seen as truth. The videotape word is seen as truth. tape, write, document. You say tape, I'll get back to that at the very, very end, but talk about precedent. But documentation is key for precedent. Talk about precedent.
But it's also like Charles was just saying, tape, text message, and so many domestic violence restraining orders live and die by what is written down, by what is taped, by a phone. I've seen judges take people's phones and look at their text messages as evidence of harassment,
Yes.
of evidence of contact. So that happens all the time. And in terms of precedent, what Sean had talked about just a little bit earlier was people that have moved out of the houses under the guise of being separated and trying to work things out. That sets an extremely dangerous precedent, that if there is not some agreement in place and a person moves out, a spouse moves out, saying, oh, we just need a little bit of time to work things out and to maybe take a step back, but we're not really getting divorced. The minute you step out of that house and your spouse files a complaint for the divorce, the chances of you getting back into that house become almost nil. So they've set that precedent. So anytime you're going to do anything that's going to materially and significantly alter the way you live, the way your status quo is, without some kind of agreement or speaking with a lawyer before so you know your rights, is going to set a precedent for a potential future litigation. It's moving out of the house on a temporary basis to only get then served with a complaint for divorce, you may find yourself never getting back into the house.
Right, so you could change forever the relationship you have with your children. Because we had a dear friend that became a client of the firm who ended up moving out because he couldn't take the conduct that was going on and the intensity coming from his spouse. But he probably could have got a restraining order had he documented things better. You know, kept the text messages, recorded her, and I'm going to talk about recording in 1 second. He did it, he moved out, leverage was gone in this situation, right? And he did it because the emotional dynamics we talked about earlier. Emotions make us do crazy things. I'll tell you one quick story, unbelievably critical, right? And this is going to sound very strange. We advocate, New Jersey is a one-party state, we advocate taping, not to set people up, to protect the truth. Unfortunately, people lie. We've said a lot of nice things in this phone call, talked about people, talked about best interests of children, talked about caring, all these things. Now we're going to get down to the uglier side of what you have to do to protect yourself, right? People lie. They lie all the time. They manipulate people. They do bad things. We live in a world that most people are really nice and some people are horrendous and horrible and will lie continuously. So I had a case not long ago. I could tell 100 stories. Brian and Chris could too. But it was a divorce case where my client was being subjected to domestic violence, right? And in fact, attempted rape, okay? True story. And we're dealing with this case. And it was a short-term marriage, and the position of the adversary was that my client was in a situation, this very nice young woman, where she married this guy for his money. She was trying to get a quick hit, get out of the situation financially. I'm using their terms, not mine. Quick hit financially. And this is how condescendingly, disrespectfully my client was being spoken about. I advocated to my client to tape it, tape the things that were going on. They were horrible. She had to lock herself into closets, bathrooms, crazy stories. He'd be banging on the doors with broomsticks, screaming, awful, crazy stuff. I deposed him, and in 30 minutes by asking questions like, so, have you ever raised your voice to your wife? Oh, no. You never raised your voice to your wife? No. Never, ever? Never, ever. You're sure? Objection, harassment? No. Okay, never, ever, ever? Never. Right? I did that with about 20 different questions throughout the deposition. So you never use the word F word, the C word, P word, most awful. Never. I would never use that kind of, never, ever. Objection, you're asking my client. Never, ever? Never, ever. Right, so we're going on, showing a little bit of the teeth that we could have. As this whole thing went along, by the end of the deposition, I started pulling out transcripts and saying, okay, how about this? Did you ever say, ba, 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 ba? The person turned white as a ghost. Lawyer said, can we please step out of here? We went out in the parking lot, literally from the building, and settled the case. That was because of documentation. Document. It tells the truth.
So I think we went over a bunch of things that you should do and some things you shouldn't do in our last segment. But our next topic, really quickly, because we are running out of time, is mistakes that people make that impact their issues in their divorce. And I'm just going to run through a couple of them, and maybe we can open it up for discussion.
Try to do that in 5 minutes max.
One
5 minutes, folks.
One thing is, do not lie to your attorney. The worst thing you can do is have your attorney fight for you and put facts out there that are just untrue. because when unproven, it makes everyone look really bad. It's better to have a bad fact, know it, deal with it, minimize it, and say all the other good things that around this maybe one bad fact.
Look at Donald Trump, right? Had Donald Trump, again, using that example, had they brought those videos out 6 months ago, that audio taper said, listen, I've done some stupid things. Here they are. That tape has no meaning. When it came out, how it came out, it makes him look like he's hiding things awful, right?
Be very careful, and we underline very and capitalize every letter about what you put on social media. It is within the last few years, I can't tell you how many times I've had people come in and show me stuff that was posted on social media by the other side, the soon-to-be ex-spouse. If you're in a new relationship, it's probably okay, but don't post millions of pictures of you and your new boyfriend or girlfriend on social media. It can harm it can enrage your ex-spouse, that's for sure. It can set some precedent as to whether or not you're spending money on this person. It can damage your relationship with your children because your ex-spouse or your spouse at the time may certainly be sharing these things with your children, or your children just, my children are a lot better at social media than I am. If there's something out there, they're going to find it before I'll find it. So very, very careful. Even
though it's not relevant to the court itself, it can still have an impact, right? But with certain judges.
Why be on the defense right away when you don't have to be?
Absolutely.
It will damage your credibility with your friends, your family, your attorney, your children, and the court. Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's just unnecessary. It is an unnecessary move to create more stress and dynamics for yourself that you just don't need.
Don't use your children to convey messages or to make your point. If you have something to say and you have the ability to communicate with your spouse, say it. Say it to them or text it to them. Have a conversation. If you can't, then use your attorney. Do not tell your kids to go tell mom or dad this, or worse, don't tell your kids that mom or dad is a bad you-know-what because of this. It's unnecessary. Your kids are half you and half your spouse. And you attack your spouse, they feel attacked.
Right. And Chris, by the way, you want to make an agreement with your spouse. Let's both not do this.
Absolutely.
And if your spouse is doing it, it's something you want to be documenting.
Right.
Because that can be something
100%.
that will impact other issues in the case, including custody and if there were experts in the case. So let's keep it there.
Yep. Don't do anything illegal and then try to hide it and not tell your attorney. Hiding assets is more often than not they are uncovered somehow, some way. There is a way to protect your money but not hide assets. It goes back to lying to your attorney.
Drugs, drinking and driving, all these things can have catastrophic consequences.
Right. Going back to what we said way earlier is try, whenever possible, not to let your emotions dictate your decisions. Make educated decisions, well-informed decisions. Speak to your attorney. Don't have knee-jerk reactions. It goes back to it goes back to even the texting. If you're going to text a nasty message to your spouse, look at it 2 or 3 times, wait 5 minutes, wait 10 minutes, go back before you hit send, because once it's sent, it is evidence.
Yeah. And by the way, journal. We talk about journaling, measuring your mind. Write those nasty texts to yourself in your own journal and don't send them. And there's an amazing power by writing things. The reason we text and write things and send them is because it makes us feel better in a split second. Hurts us later. Still write it down or write it to yourself in your journal. Do not send it out, into cyberspace.
I have seen so many issues, both domestic violence and just credibility issues, motions, and even issues that aren't 100% germane to the text, but the judge has said, I see this text, I see the way you speak to your ex-spouse, you use these words, and all of a sudden, if it's an iffy issue, it could go either way. You lost because you sent the really stupid text.
Right. Is there anything else you want to hit? Let's go 60 seconds on substance, then we'll wrap up.
I'm done with that point, and now our next slide is?
Our next slide is our logo. It's the Callagy Law, caring, urgent, aggressive. And Sean, can you just explain very briefly what you meant by caring, urgent,
Let's wrap it right. Is there wrap it right there. And okay.
Well, the next
So-
slide's a great one because it's our pouncing lion. So maybe
Okay.
we can, let's go right to that one.
So here's the idea. We did a little bit of an example before. We are caring, urgent, and aggressive people. You could look at us online. If you Google my name, you see the jury verdict. You Google, the firm, you see Chris and Brian, certified matrimonial attorneys, having done this for an incredibly long period of time, knowing the court system in and out, having been law clerks. We simply ask you, if you felt good about today, let us know about it. Share with other people. We are, in fact, we weren't sure, about going forward. We are, in fact, going to do additional webinars. If there's topics you'd like to hear, please tell us. But the reason we have that line is because we are caring, urgent, and aggressive. And those are the characteristics, in my opinion, that are not easy to find in the legal community, because a lot of folks are out there either overly aggressive and it's kind of shtickish and it goes away very quickly, or they're not paying attention to details, so they're not caring enough. There's an empathy gap. So we're trying to have it so that people walk into our law firm and it feels good. They come in the front door, they're greeted with caring, respect. They meet people, and it's an environment that feels safe and feels like a place that you want to be. That is our goal and opportunity here, to fundamentally change the way people feel about lawyers one client at a time. We offer a free consultation to you if you're coming in through this webinar. Please let us know. So Chris, Brian, anything that you want to finally say?
Well, our second to last slide is just, these are the results that you want to achieve, and we will help you achieve. Peace of mind, happiness, better relationships, financial stability. That is the end game in every divorce for all of our clients.
So thanks for attending.
Yeah. And listen, that's the transformation you'll get that we're telling you by working with us. If any question, call us. We're happy to answer. We thank you so much for your time. So we apologize for going a few minutes over, but we really wanted to deliver the best we could. This is the first version of the webinar we've done. Give us your comments. Give us your thoughts. What did you like? What can we grow in? Other topics or subjects? Brian and Chris, outstanding job. I really thank you and appreciate
Thank you, Sean.
both of you very much.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate you as well.
Okay. Have a great day, everybody. Great weekend. Thank you.